Hey folks, this is Dave Albert with a quick take. In this quick take, I'm going to talk to you about Jupyter Notebooks. That's a Jupyter. If you're not familiar with them, they're very popular in the machine learning community. So a Jupyter Notebook is kind of like writing code, but instead of it being basically in a program, it's kind of like in a markdown wiki almost. I probably should have looked up the definition, but I'm sure you're able to do that. So you can write different chunks of code, execute them independently, and by saving that code, then it's always available. So each different block of code can also reference any variables or functions that you've created in one of the other blocks. And then that allows you to, reuse your code, obviously. But instead of having to rerun programs, or say you're using some sort of tool to query your database, you can actually keep your little experiments together. And then say you've got ad hoc queries or reports that you need to run periodically, you can have them all together, run them very easily, get the output directly into a web browser. So it basically spins up a little web server that you access locally. You can also do them within data centers. Azure has Azure Notebooks, I think is what they call it. But it's I don't think that like VPN access works very well. So for our situation, we use port forwarding with our Kubernetes to connect directly to our database and can run our queries to understand our data. By using the notebooks, they're available very easily. Now, the reason I wanted to bring this up is that I always kind of just associated them in my mind to machine learning and never really thought how useful it would be just to have that handy. So I was using, so we're a MongoDB shop, and I use Robo3T as a client to connect to Mongo when I'm not using just the typical command line client, because Robo3T has multiple tabs and it's easier to copy and paste certain things, and it's easier to scroll. Typically I'm a console type of person, but sometimes it's easier. But what I was doing was I was copying the code that was written in Robo3T and pasting it into Evernote. Then I'd have to remember to go and grab it from Evernote as opposed to just writing it from scratch each time. Not that the queries were necessarily that complex, but, no need to waste time. So then I was just talking with my machine learning engineer, and she was talking about her Jupyter Notebook, and I thought, you know what, I should probably try using that. And I did, and it really worked well. The only thing is that I prefer JavaScript because that's what I write most of my code in over Python. Python's fine. It's good language, but sometimes it's just easier to do JavaScript, especially when you're dealing with Mongo, since Mongo basically interprets JavaScript perfectly from the client. So I wondered, is there a way to create JavaScript-based Jupyter Notebooks? And there is. It's called IJavascript. So what do they call it? It is a JavaScript kernel for the Jupyter Notebook. So if you're familiar with Python, you might have heard of IPython, which is a REPL, REPL. Don't remember what that stands for, but it's common. You type in some commands and it stores state, and then you can execute different things and see what the output is. IPython is more powerful. IJavascript is IPython for JavaScript, and also includes the kernel to allow you to create Jupyter Notebooks that interpret JavaScript. So that really gave me a lot of power, and made me a lot more productive. I swear I could have saved so much time trying to remember which note I put it in Evernote, and then ending up putting some of the notes in my kind of daily tracker list and some of them in a separate Mongo note. But now I keep them all together as part of the Jupyter Notebooks. I also use a file syncing program. Well, actually, I use several of them. I've got Dropbox and OneDrive and Google Backup and Sync is what they call it now. It used to be just Google Drive. I think I've got this one in the Microsoft's OneDrive because that has the most space. It's the company's account, and I don't know. That's really the only reason I was just trying to separate my own personal backups from the company one, so that should I ever need to, I can remove the access without having to mess with any of my own personal software packages. So that means that I've got it on my laptop and my home computer. And if I ever have another device, it would be there as well. So every time I save, it's immediately synced over to the rest of the devices. That's how syncing software works. But it's great to have that always available, easy to spin up, because we can basically just change that port forward. Then you can run it against test or production. I use I use a variable to define the environment that I'm currently working in, because we use environment within our collection names. So it's easy to make, one change, and that will cascade through all the different code blocks. It's definitely worth your while to spend maybe an hour learning how to do a Python notebook, if that. So just forget that machine learning AI is where you may have heard of it first. They're bloody useful, no matter who you are or what you do. If you're writing code and it's not necessarily part of a specific application, but more experiments or ad hoc things, you're probably going to save yourself time. And it's nice to use. It's not, it's delightful. So, yep. My recommendation, get yourself a Jupyter Notebook. I'll add some links in the description. But again, that's Jupyter, Jupyter. And the kernel is IJavascript. And that's the letter I. So that's it. Later. Until next time, remember, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.